Hey, everybody. I'm Jordan Tenenbaum, host of Celigo's Technology Leadership Podcast. As always, I'm joined by Mark Simon, Celigo's Vice President of Strategy. Hey, Mark. And today we are joined by our guest, Adam Dennison, the Vice President of Midsize Enterprise Services at the Channel Company. Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jordan. Hey, Mark. Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Hey, I'm great to see you again.
You too.
Fantastic. Old friends meeting in new places is what I like to see. A great way to start off the podcast. Adam, we want to start you off, kind of give you a platform here and make sure the listeners can get to know and understand you a little bit better. But if you don't mind, could you tell us just a little bit about your journey to becoming the Vice President of the Midsize Enterprise Services at the Channel Company?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. So my high-tech media career, it's been over 20 years now. It started back in 2001. I was a regional sales rep slinging ad pages for Information Week, which at the time was the largest controlled circulation IT publication in the United States. Was running the New England territory, loving what I was doing. Had an opportunity a few years into that to move up into a more of an account director role, have a little bit more responsibility. So I actually switched over, stayed within CMP, which was our parent company, and went over to CRN, which is owned by the Channel Company, and I'll get back to that in a second. That's Computer Reseller News. So rather, I switched from that end user focused Information Week, and then went over and started to learn the channel. So CRN catered to solution providers, and even at the time, I don't think they had really a lot of MSSPs. Did that for a couple years, and then around 2007 or 8, had an opportunity to move over to a brand called CIO.com. I'm sure you're familiar with that brand. I'm in the Boston area. IDG is the publisher of CIO, so it was a really interesting move to the CMP was based in Manhasset, Long Island, so I was able to kind of work for a large company here in the Boston area that was extremely respected, and the CIO brand was one that was highly respected as well. I competed with it for a number of years. So went over there, and I also had an opportunity to move out of, I could see that ad pages weren't going to be where things were headed. And I had an opportunity to go over and run their custom solutions group, which, content creation, research, things like that, for companies to help them, thought leadership types of pieces. So I stayed there for about 13 years. I worked my way up to publisher of the CIO brand, was running their US events. And then COVID hit in 2020. And so, all of our events froze. That was a big piece of what I was doing. And so they made some shifts, and I was out. At that point then, just started kind of reaching out to my contacts, didn't have a resume. LinkedIn wasn't updated. I reached out to folks that I had worked with at CRN, which they had gone through a lot of changes and did a management buyout, created the Channel Company. Started talking to them, and they said, hey, we really like your end user background at CIO, because we have this brand called MES, which at the time was just Midsize Enterprise Summit, that they had bought from Gartner back in about 2008. And they said, we're not really doing much with it. It's three live events. Why don't you come on board and see if we can build this thing out? And so in July of 2020, I came back to the Channel Company, if you will. Quite a few people are still there that were there when I was with them in the early thousands, and I've been with them ever since. And now we're building out, MES to be a much larger entity than what it was when I got there.
That is fantastic. Thank you for that intro. And just to kick us off slightly into second gear, we'll say, could you tell us just a little bit about what the Channel Company does, the problems it solves for its customers? And yeah, we'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. The Channel Company overall, we're a global high-tech media agency services consulting organization. Again, I mentioned, the flagship brand is CRN. Which caters, the solution providers, the channel. It's the Bible in that space. I sit in that little world called MES, so I represent the end users. But we have grown significantly through acquisition over the last 4 years since I've been here. 5 or 6 acquisitions to be exact. One of the more recent ones was about a year and a half ago. We bought Incisive Media, which is UK based, and along with that came CRN UK, and then a brand called Computing, which is a very well respected end user brand over in the UK, and I'll get into that in a little bit in terms of how MES and computing are working together. But yeah, we are a mid-market size organization, and we act like one, and so it's nice that the audience that I serve, being in that mid-market space, we are one as well. So we kind of really understand each other when we're talking.
Adam, that's a helpful description, and I'm certainly familiar with CRN, having been a practice leader in a consulting practice. We were one of the top NetSuite VARs, so that was all, that was something we were always working for, getting coverage in there.
Yeah.
Getting some of the awards was always something we're striving for and look forward when we got those. So certainly, from my perspective, and certainly would agree with you, assessment, that being like the premier channel, channel focused, and I think of it as a magazine from a few years ago, but really it's right. It's a multimedia presence, right. Really. And so I've got a good concept of that. But on the MES side, can you describe a little more? You touched on a little bit those events, 3 events, but can you kind of describe what those events are and how those services work with your member base?
Yeah, and I think it would be helpful to explain what we mean by mid-market as well, so that we're all talking the same language.
Very good.
First and foremost, when we say mid-market, I like to say that it's a big swim lane, and we've used Gartner's definition of it. And Gartner, as a matter of fact, they're our exclusive main stage research partner as well. We do twice annual State of the Mid-Market research, so it's kind of helpful to have Gartner there and their branding involved. But when we say mid-market, we mean 50 million to 2 billion in revenue. So that's again a huge swim lane, but you're cutting out the Fortune 1000 and then the very low end of the SMB. When we think about it in terms of employees or seats, 100 to 2,500, and then when we think about it in terms of an IT department, 5 to 50. So that's the criteria we use to bring folks into our events and into our MES world. Everything that we do has that mid-market lens on it. We believe that the mid-market is dreadfully underserved when it comes to the media, when it comes to analysts, when it comes to vendors. To be honest with you, a lot of vendors, they have the technology that they believe can serve the mid-market, but it's too much. They don't need all of the attributes that a specific technology might have, or it's too expensive and they simply can't afford to get involved in that. So we play in that mid-market only space. And when I was over at CIO, we played in the heavy enterprise, extremely competitive space. We had mid-market, but we didn't shine a light on them. So that's why we have such a wonderful relationship, I think, with our audience, because they know that we're out there battling for them. They know that we're vetting vendors and who they should be talking to as much as we can to make sure that they are mid-market friendly and mid-market focused. You mentioned the 3 events, and I know we've grown substantially at MES in the last few years with our platform. When I came here, it was simply live event platform. So we do 3 events a year, and we do what's called a hosted model. And so that means if you're a mid-market IT professional and you fit those criteria that I said, we'll bring you to the event. We will pick up your airfare. We'll pick up your hotel accommodations. In return, they're going to do two things for us, and two big ones. One is they're going to fill out a big qualification card. That's a lot of different technologies listed. Is it high, medium, low on their list? What their budget looks like? How do they buy? Do they buy through the channel direct? Who are their partners? What vendors are they on their software stack, the hardware stack? And then we have this one area that we ask, what are your big projects for the year? And that's simply a write-in. So you get a lot of rich information and data there. This information and all this data, this then gets turned over to our vendors and solution providers that sponsor and fund the event. And that's in return what we provide them. Then the other thing they're going to do for us is they're going to be where we ask them to be at the event, and they're going to be attentive and they're going to be engaged. You're not going to find them on the golf course, by the pool, at the bar at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the backbone of our events, we do a lot of it main stage and, pavilions and things like that. We do what we call boardrooms. And so we take our audience and we divide them up into groups of 8 to 10, kind of birds of a feather. Maybe it's some specific, technologies they're interested in, or they're all in government or something along those lines. And we put them in these boardrooms, and several times throughout the day, we shut everything else down, and our sponsors buy boardroom time where they get to go in and do a 25-minute, I like to call it a front of the focus, front of the glass focus group with that audience. No other vendors are in there. And that's where a lot of the business takes place. You might not get a contract in there, but you know who you want to follow up with, and you have great opportunities after that. So that's our event platform. And then I'll let you know the other two that we've launched on the digital side. So during COVID, the channel company made a concerted effort to launch a communities strategy. And so with that, in September of 21, we launched the MES IT Leadership Network. And so that is an online gated community. We have over 800 qualified IT leaders in that network. We also have some vendors and sponsors in there, Celigo being one of our premier ones. Content partners like Gartner and other folks are in there as well. And they really use this as an extension of the event. And they're asking questions. They're getting free peer advice, to be honest with you. They're asking questions about specific initiatives or specific vendors I'm looking at. Has anybody worked with these folks? Does someone I've got an integration issue. Could you provide me some support here? And, other folks may have just done that 6 months ago, and they're more than happy to provide that information back to them. So that is that's our gated community on a network level platform. And then we're really proud, today is a month ago today, we launched MES Computing. So that is our first content destination site, mescomputing.com. The computing piece is that marriage between MES and computing in the UK that I had mentioned. We hired a senior editor, Samara Lynn. She's fantastic. And again, everything we do in here is focused at that mid-market. And, we borrow, we're still small, right? We got one editor. So we borrow some content from computing that makes sense. And we're looking to ramp that up. Now we can do lead gen programs. It helps folks like Celigo do branding and advertising outside of just 3 events. So we've really become, in the last 4 years, a live event and now digital networking plus content site platform.
That's really cool. And I just pulled up the MES Computing site here. I hadn't checked it out yet, so yeah. I'll get it up here. I'll have to familiarize myself with it. What I think is interesting about what you do there at MES was there's 2 sides to it. And we'll start one from from somewhat of a selfish perspective, from a self-centered perspective, which is as a sponsor there. So if you're a provider of services to mid-market companies, full disclosure, right? Celigo is involved, as you mentioned. We were part of sponsored for the two of the events last year, and I personally went to the spring one last year in Orlando, and that was, what you described, those boardroom events. Those were real. I mean, for me, that was unlike any experience I'd ever been involved with. Because I think we had, I'm trying to think, we had like 16 of those, something. Yeah. It's hard to keep count. There were so many, and they were, you get in the room, there's 10 or 12 of these IT leaders, and most of them were CIOs or VP of systems, very senior, and 10 or 12, and the focus is on you, and you've got your 20-25 minutes to explain what you do, why it's valuable, and then sometime at the end, then you get graded on this too. I mean, that's the other thing, right? You get these grades and on how your presentation went. And I'm going to be honest, we went and did the first one, and we were like, oh shit, like we got some kind of we made some assumptions about the audience. We're like, okay, well, we've got, but it was and I always talk about this internally. Talking to our chief growth officer about this the other day, saying like, it was such a fantastic experience because you get to pressure test something with your audience that we're trying to sell to and target. and make sure that we're conveying the concept of value. And if you're selling and you're not talking about value and you're hand waving or you're using too many buzzwords, you will get called out on the spot.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. I mean, I learned so much, and we refined how we talk about the product, how we adjust in that 2 days. I mean, it was a lot of fun. We got a little competition going internally because we were trading off between a couple of us taking leads. So it was who got the bet. You know, there was a little side bet going on who was going to get the best score at the end. But more importantly, it was really interesting way as an organization to be like, okay, well, are we to get that super direct feedback and be like, just improve what you're doing right there in real time. And I thought that was, I haven't seen anything like it, because you can go out and present and do all these things, but to get that very raw feedback in a kind of very tight spot. And you know, it's clear that it was a little bit of a, in a way, it's kind of like you mentioned community earlier. And I almost think of it like a club.
Sure.
Because so many of those leaders knew each other and they had a rapport and they fed off that. And it was actually really, really cool. So that was my take on it, being on that on a sponsor side. Was man, it was hard and had us sweating, but in a good way, and it made us you know, really made us better out of it. And I'd encourage any company that had something that was applicable to really look at it. It's a good way to, like, you know, like I said, pressure test what you're doing, and you know, no matter what happens, you're going to be better for it.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a few things there. Our attendees, our users, as part of the MES community, and they do call it an MES community, you know, they take this event very seriously, right? They don't get to go to a lot of things. We have an advisory board of 20 to 25 sitting, you know, CIOs, VPs of IT. We ask an awful lot out of them to help us with the strategy, you know, speakers, you know, help bring us potential sponsors, you know, and they're the ones that run the boardrooms, the boardroom leader. So the person that said, hey, you got 5 minutes left, that's the boardroom leader. That's one of our advisory board leaders. And, you know, we measure everything and we want to provide that feedback. And I think it's okay to not have a great boardroom if you've got 7 more, if you take the constructive criticism. It's the vendors that don't pay attention to it and say, that boardroom doesn't know what they're talking about. They're the ones that are going to have a bad show. So, you know, we do the best we can to prep vendors ahead of time. We have what we call an adoptive vendor program. So we have an advisory board member will get on, say, hey, let me see your presentation. Let me make some suggestions. Let me do this. Let me do that. You know, we do build a better boardroom. You know, we do all we can, but then it's on the vendor. You know, then the challenging part can be, and we understand, you know, a lot of the people that buy it and that sit on the prep calls, they're not the one that's presenting. The presenters are very busy people typically. And so they, you know, they're like, I don't need to be on that prep call. And then they go in and they're like, oh, geez. And you're like, we gave you a prep call. So
I was not on the prep call.
Yeah, we do the best we can to get everybody prepped, because we want everyone to have a great experience. Yeah. We want the attendees to come back. You know, we do guarantee, you know, 60% net new at every event, but if you run through a year and you're not there, we'll bring you back again. Which is why, you know, some folks, maybe they haven't been to one in a year and a half. They come back, they see a board member and they're like, oh, you know, they're reconnecting with them. So it works.
You know, something that seems abundantly clear is the value of the community that you're creating as the channel company at these events. Someone that we had on our podcast, both Mark and I, was Ashley Dodge, who's the VP of community at Capato. They're one of the biggest Salesforce development, CI/CD, I guess, development companies out there. And she built their community from like 6,000 to 100,000. And there's all these engineers and coders and very smart people getting a whole bunch of value. And it's clear that, you know, for the channel company, this kind of tight knit, you know, community that has a lot of rapport with each other, as Mark was mentioning, is not only just important to, you know, kind of fueling these events, but also providing really good feedback to attendees. And I'm kind of curious, like, what's your take on developing these communities? How do you do it? What's the strategy behind it? That's like a kind of like a not really a talked about aspect when it comes to conferences, but you guys seem to be doing something different. So I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah. And I think the MES community, it is tight knit. You know, they feel like the underdog a lot. So as long as we're we're doing everything through that mid-market lens that I like to say. We keep their attention, and they know we've got their back. The challenging part for me was, launching the MAS IT Leadership Network, the literally the gated online community. I'm not part of any online networking communities. I've never been a network community manager. Didn't know what I was going to do really. So didn't have any training on it. We just said, hey, let's, we try things at the channel company. So we went out, vetted, various platforms, said, hey, let's spin this thing up. We did test it with our audience. We always, we survey the heck out of them before we launch things. So we did an online survey. We're like, there's something there. There's definitely something there. We did, we asked them what networks they're part of. Have you seen anything like this? The answers were no. There is, we did our last MES virtual event, and my boss Bill Jones and I went in to every boardroom, as you did, Mark. And again, it's exhausting. Yeah. But at least I was able to sit in my chair and do it. Excuse me. But we went in there and we said, hey, this is our vision with this community. What do you think? And we got a lot of great feedback. Not everybody was gung ho about it, but most people were like, yeah, I'm definitely interested. And it's free for them, right? So as long as they qualify, they're in. One thing they did tell us, they said, look, we know you're going to fund it with advertising dollars. We get that. We want to talk to vendors. We do, but we want to have our own space also. So within there's an IT leaders only group that is just them, myself, and a couple of my MES colleagues. And we're very serious about that. So there's different dialogues that happen on both sides, but that immediately bought a lot of trust out of them. And the fact that we keep it that way, they'll ask questions in there that they wouldn't in the all members. Like they might ask about specific vendors. They don't trash them, but they might say, hey, I'm looking at these 3 vendors in this space. What are you thinking? And they'll get 8-10 responses within a day and a half. So the other piece of it, I'm very lucky, I think, that I don't have to drive dialogue in the network. I'm not the one posting everything and hoping that people respond to it. There was a certain point when we got past like 500 attendees that people start posting their own stuff. And so I can kind of sit back and comment, and I produce content in there. I'm very visible, but I don't have to try to get them to talk, because I think if that were the case, it would fail. It has to be them wanting to communicate with each other. It's very professional. And it's a lot of fun. And I can't wait to grow it larger. I mean, I'd love to be at, 5,000 right now, but I'm also very serious about keeping it quality. So I personally accept or deny everybody that's in there. And I think that's key as well. They're not hearing back from somebody that's a consultant that shouldn't be in there. They're not hearing back from a student or something like that. They're hearing back from true peers.
It's very Reddit of you. I love that. Yep. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, it sounds like you've reached that point with just 500 members that you have that, I was thinking that critical mass, like any community needs that, has that tipping point where it generates its own content. It doesn't need curation. And that point is sort of different depending on what it is and how it's constructed. And a lot of communities, 500 wouldn't be near enough, but it's interesting that, I think that says something that, okay, at that point, it's, you've got those lively dialogues, you're augmenting it, but you're not having to keep it going.
Yeah.
And I just think about like the access to that, having been in a CIO role, CTO, CIO role for a couple of companies, a little bit, a bit under your, not quite mid-market, but high growth and smaller. And just thinking like, wow, being able to have had access to a community like that would have made a huge difference, because regardless of whether you're 50 or 100 million or you're 15 and you're trying to figure out how, and you have the line of sight to being 50 in another couple of years, the technology decisions you're making are, you realize that they're make or break, whether you're spending $100K or $1 million, whatever it may be, you're like, I can't screw this up, because if I do, like, it's going to set us, it's, you know, it's not so much the money often, it's the time.
Yeah,
it's like,
absolutely.
oh, if I lose 6 months on this,
and the credibility.
Yeah, you're going to lose personal credibility.
Yeah.
Often it gets represented as organizational credibility, because it shows up to your customers, your other partners, your vendors, whoever it may be, you know, but very often your customers. And so, you know, it's hard, you know, it can be hard to move quickly and assuredly unless you've done this thing before. And when you haven't, it's hard to find, okay, who to listen to, that are a set of advisors. You might have one or two, but those are only sort of, you know, they're somewhat isolated viewpoints. I think creating a community like that is really valuable. And I'd encourage, you know, any technology leader to try to find that community however they can. And certainly from what I saw, MES was a good avenue to that, and pretty valuable. How are you finding that you're competing with any other community efforts like that, or what are you coming up against anything that sort of takes away from yours?
I'm glad you asked that, because that was part of what we asked in the three times. We asked it in the survey, so the online survey, we asked it in all those different boardrooms, and then we asked it of our advisory board members. And I like to look at this and say that where MES plays is the intersection of business and technology. We're not down in the weeds in the tech. My audience can go there. I cannot. My audience can go there, but we like to be at that intersection of business and technology. And they said, you know, so we said, what are your communities that you're involved in? And they said, well, the MES community. This was before we launched the online one. They meant the live event. And they said, well, what's outside of that? And it was, excuse me, it was, you know, a lot of the local, maybe a local sim chapter, maybe a local vertical play chapter. Maybe I know the head of the CIO in Indiana CIO network, and you know, they've got an Indiana network. Like, it's that more localized thing. So then I started proactively saying to them, because there was you know, I'll say it now, Spiceworks, right? That was a competitor that popped up, gosh, probably, I don't know, 15 or more years ago, when they popped up, and we were like, they're changing the game here. And the question was, are you IT leaders part of that? And is this going to just be something that you know, you wouldn't spend your time with? And the answer we got by and large was, they are not part of Spiceworks. They have some team members that are, because Spiceworks tends to be very developer focused, very, very technical. Or they were
down a level or two, a little more end user than it's leadership intersection.
Yeah, it's not that intersection there.
Yeah.
So they said, look, you know, there's nothing like this that we're a part of, you know, especially from an online standpoint. So so it was kind of an open playing field when it came to that. Certainly we have competitors out there. We have some specific, you know, event competitors and stuff. We do some things, you know, different ways. And then the other piece would be when we launched the website, you know, I mean, any place one of my attendees' eyeballs goes, or a dollar from a potential sponsor goes, is going to be deemed a competitor. But to truly line it up and say, here's an online content news analysis site dedicated to the mid-market, I don't think there is one out there.
Clearly there's a need. I think, I mean, that we know that
a lot of companies in the mid-market. Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things that I've seen as a trend, and this might be a good segue to talk about trends a little more broadly. You know, in my past, I don't know how much we've gotten to talk about my consulting past, my team did something like 500. I think of it more broadly as digital transformation initiatives, but at the core was always ERP implementations, and then we had integration and everything else over the span of the time that I led that practice. And I think about that, and you get to see a lot of emerging patterns. And one of the and those were predominantly in mid-market, some SMB, some enterprise, but you know, kind of the bell curve was in mid-market. And I mean, one of the biggest trends that I saw was just, you know, technology leadership challenges for mid-market companies. Whether often companies, maybe they were older, more established organizations, trying to move towards the future, but they don't have a technology leader in house. That was one of the biggest problems.
Yep.
They were in the process of becoming a technology company, but no one was thinking of that being a technology leader, because it's one thing to have an IT admin or administrator or sysadmin, a technical person, but it's very different to have a technology savvy person as a business leader in your organization. Those are two different things. I don't care what title they have.
Yep.
That's really important. And so I saw that often is something missing. I often saw other things where maybe they had somebody, but they were more of a keep the trains running on time, keep the lights on type of person. And they weren't really transformational. They weren't when the organization needed, or the CIO or board had said, hey, we're going to transform or move forward, but they had a misalignment.
Yep.
And you know, these were like very, very common patterns. And it was like, wow, it's really hard to move your company forward unless you have that right alignment around your technology leadership. And when I saw a lot of people were trying to step up into those roles and fill those roles or from different places in the organization, and oftentimes they needed good coaching, they needed help, they needed advisement. And you know, I saw as a consultant, there's opportunity there. You can become a trusted advisor. You look out for their best interest. But I saw a lot of consulting companies taking advantage of these gaps and like essentially carving out their own fiefdoms, essentially.
Yep.
And it you know, didn't have some of the best outcomes. And I'm curious, have you seen the same things in mid-market in that trend? I mean, what do you see around that sort of key leadership role and the needs there for companies like this?
Yeah, I mean, first off, when you just look at titles, right? Not every mid-market company has a CIO. Not every mid-market company has a VP of IT. Even it could be a director, is the highest ranking official. I think a lot of it has to do with how the companies run, who's at the top, who's the CEO. A lot of these companies are privately owned. A lot of them are family owned. Do they believe in technology? Do they not believe in technology? Are they going to put the resources behind that? I don't really look at reporting structure that much. The majority of our audience does report to a CEO, president, or owner. Next one after that is typically a COO or a CFO. I think we've moved well beyond the days of, you know, I report to a CFO, so I'm not as strategic, or I'm not as, you know, wanted. I think, you know, technology has certainly, you know, spread across industry and you know, organizations that they need this. So, you know, I think a lot of what you're saying, we saw 12, 15 years ago, maybe. Now it's like 10 years up. I mean, a lot of people think tenure for a CIO is, you know, two years. We see it up around 5, 6 years right now. Yeah. If you're reporting into the top, if you're, you know, you're investing in technology, you've got a trusted, you know, opportunity to meet with the rest of the business leaders. You know, they want that stability there. You know, a lot of our audience too, they came up through technology. So like, again, they can, in a boardroom, you'd better bring someone that can talk tech, because if they go there and you can't, you know, they'll let you get back to them, but they're going to ding you. So, you know, they wear a lot of hats. But yeah, I think, you know, I think now where we're seeing some of this is around like security leaders, right? So I think it's only 15% of the mid-market has a CISO. And, you know, most of it still is reporting into the CIO. They might have, I think it's on average, our audience has 1.5 dedicated security IT professionals. So that's where I think there's a pretty big gap right now. And they're hustling to try to get that filled. And that's where they're trying to lean on some of their partners and MSPs to fill some of those gaps as well. But yeah, I mean, the profession's coming off a long way in you know, the 20 years that I've been here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Those are some good insights, particularly that you mentioned the security one, Adam. That stands out to me notably.
Oh yeah,
I know just here at Celigo, because we're selling an integration platform, and we're trying to be disruptive. We're working with a whole spectrum: mid-market, enterprise, SMB. And the one thing that I have seen in the 5 years that I've been here, and I've seen it pretty closely for a while, our security and compliance, our data protection officer reported into me, so I saw this very up close and personal for a while. But I saw the movement downstream of very sophisticated and oftentimes very intensive security and compliance vetting as a vendor. So we're coming into a deal, we're working with someone, it's great. You start to talk about their process, and they have, oh, you've got to go through X, Y, and Z in a very rigid manner. And that used to be something you saw at 100 million or 250 million. And now we're seeing it down in, I'm going to be honest, sometimes we see it in a $5 million company. They're bringing in a consultant that essentially they brought someone in as an outside advisor. They're running this across all their vendors for them. We see, different external software platforms, so the whole spectrum, even when they aren't quite ready to hire in that data protection officer or CISO yet, but I mean, this is just moving downstream and becoming much more, broad, and seeing universally, and often seeing it come up when we do renewals and stuff. It comes up and all of a sudden it was like, oh, there was no security. They've been a customer for 3 years, no security review. It's like, wow, here we go. And we're comfortable with it. We've got a great SOC 2, and like we've got one of the best SOC 2 audit reports, cleanest one that I've ever seen, having reviewed a lot of our vendors audit reports. And so I'm like, hey, this is, so we're good at that, but it still takes a lot of work. And I think a lot of companies are getting, caught off guard by this on both sides of the fence. Whether they're selling us and they're a vendor, and they're not quite prepared for because I think this is only going to increase greatly, especially as some of the compliance we see. Some of the state by state compliance that we really saw with California, GDPR led the way, and then California, and then you see it sweep through. And now that we have other states starting to adopt their own data compliance protections, when you look to the future, potentially in a few years, having let's say a dozen or 20 of these individual state data protection policies out there, so this puts a huge burden on everybody, both the vendors and also the mid-sized companies. How are they going to manage this? So I think it's very, it's an important thing that you bring up, because I think it's something that's going to change and create quite a big burden here. How do you see, how does MES help their members navigate any of this? Is there anything that you're doing yet that kind of helps them along that path?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all the connections that we help them make. We don't provide any specific training or anything like that. We're not in that space right now, at least.
Yeah.
It's, when we have a member or an attendee that can find an answer from another peer member or attendee, and we can help make those connections for them, I think that, that's gold for us. That keeps them interested. It keeps them coming back. And quite frankly, on the vendor side as well, like, our vendors and suppliers and solution providers, they're not just there to foot the bill. I mean, we want them to succeed. So we want to set the right boardroom, meetings up with the right vendors, so that, when they send us their ideal customer profile, we send them the right people that are in that space looking for it. It's up to the IT leader to decide if that vendor's, got what they need and can help them, down the road. But we want to make those connections. So I think that's kind of a really big piece of it. We have outside speakers, that come into our events. Some of them are going to be, motivational speakers. Some of them are going to be, we've got our IT security event coming up in just a couple of days. Former FBI guy will be there. We've got, another guy that's an attorney, talking about, kind of what he's seeing come through his office right now, and the most common threats and things like that, and how he's helping them handle it. He's like an incident response coach. And I do a monthly webcast, and some of those will be tech focused, some of them will be soft skills focused. So we're always trying to help them in that regard. But yeah, we don't provide any specific training. It's just, the best that we can do to help them make those meaningful connections. And and then from there, take it from there is how we try to serve our audience the best.
That's great. That makes a lot of sense. Now, Adam, what are you seeing any trends around? Maybe from something that's not very sexy, which is the security, to something that's a little more topical, which is AI.
Yeah.
How have you seen, because I know a lot of these mid-market leaders are under pressure to adopt or consider it. What are you seeing across the group as far as trends around AI solutions?
It's really been interesting, and I'd say like very interesting in the last, say, 6 to 8 months, when we've gone just from kind of chatter to now people are starting to put things into play. You know, by far and away right now, the top priorities are security. By far and away, the top spending is security. One of the interesting things I heard on a panel I did, we did an IT spend survey, and I had 3 CIOs on a panel do my webcast in February, and one of the guys, RC Woodson from Bristol Bay Native Corporation, said, you know, security is still getting all the funding, so I'll try to take adjacent initiatives and kind of bolt it and attach it onto that security and see if I can push that through. You know, AI is very, very interesting, and I've had some real interesting discussions around that. I've done a couple of CIO dinners recently with one of our you know, sponsor partners. You know, you mentioned there's a lot of fear right now in terms of on the business side, where are we at with this? Are we behind? You know, coming from the owner, or the marketing person, whatever, COO, you know, I see it here. I see it on all the commercials. I read about it in Wall Street Journal. Where are we? Kind of like cloud was maybe 12, 15 or so years ago. And then there's a ton of fear on we don't have a policy set up yet. We don't have the guardrails set up yet. What happens if my data goes out there in the wrong spots? Who should I use? What the heck are we doing here? So I think you've got sort of both sides of it. Ones that are like, look, I'm just going to sit back. I'm not getting pressure from above. And other ones are like, I got to do something, to the point. And I was kind of blown away by this. We did a dinner in Atlanta, and there was a mid-market law firm there, and their head of IT, this was in December, said, last week I just got $400,000 put into my budget for 2024, and it has to go toward AI. And I was like, wow. And he's like, wow is right. Like, that's nuts. I don't know what to do with it. And I'm like, I call my vendors. But I was like, that's insane. You know, like that's the kind of stuff that you're starting to see, though, where people are like, the fear of being left behind. And then you have other CIOs that are sitting down and saying, hey, look, we're not going to be behind. Like, let's pick something out that we think we can manageably move forward with, show a little bit of results, and then let's go ahead and move ahead here. You know, my own organization, we said, we were told over a month ago we were going to have an AI policy in place. I have not seen it yet. I did a dinner on Tuesday night in New York. We had 14 IT leaders there, and I said, show of hands, who's got a comprehensive AI policy? One hand went up. I said, okay, how about a non-comprehensive one, but it's you know, it's like in the work. Nobody else had their hand up. So everybody was all over this guy, and I said, can you sanitize that and send it to me? Like, can you I'm like, well, why don't you use ChatGPT to put one together? You know, it's like, so yeah, I mean, AI and automation, it's, you know, you got some folks like, AI is nothing new. And I'm like, well, no, but it's now in the hands of someone like me. So it is kind of new. And, you know, I'm toying around with it for setting up session descriptions and abstracts and things like that. Like, you know, we've got another one of our CIOs. He's the CIO of the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. And recently one of their attorneys used AI in a case, and it was inaccurate. And it wasn't good. So, you know, you got to be really careful where you're using this stuff. So I think there's a lot of fear, and you know, a lot of interest, but a lot of fear right now, and kind of hoping, you know, you go first and I'll come in behind you and let me know mistakes you made. And I'm sure we're going to start seeing that in the community. You know, who's done this with AI, and what can we share?
Wow. Well, there's a lot there to talk about, and I know you get to see such an interesting view or perspective. So there's a lot to dive in there, but I think that's reassuring to some leaders out there who are like, oh, we're totally behind, and you know the reality is, you know, everybody's kind of behind, and I think that's reassuring. Everyone has to sort of get to it, but it's still a game of catch up for most, especially mid-market companies. Honestly, really what it is. So,
well, I'd love to. I had sorry to interrupt, but I had the opportunity to interview your CEO, Jan. I think it was maybe 6-8 months ago when we brought up AI, and I said, tell me, you know, what you guys are doing in AI. And he's like, look, it's in our, because I was asking him about the hype around it, and he's like, look, it's in our products. You know, we have it, but we're not running around screaming about it because it's there. It works. He's like, our position's not going to be AI like everyone else's, because it's almost like, I look at it with cloud, like everyone was just, you know, so over the top cloud. Yeah. And it was like exhaustive for the CIOs.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned that we've had he and Jan probably mentioned that we built an AI ML team, gosh, like 3 years ago to build it into our product before the latest generation of generative AI and the newest generation of the large language models were out. And so, you know, we've been doing this for a while and kind of doing it behind the scenes, and so it's like, hey, we've been at this, but we recently, a few months ago, started using it internally, started to use our product to wire together different systems, bring the data together, and then feed it into generative AI tools, feed it into the open AI APIs, and do things like bring it together, you know, essentially disparate centers of knowledge about our product, bring it all together and use it as a tool for our internal team to answer questions. They might be use it in the back end when they're doing support internally, whatever it may be. And we see some really amazing stuff with it. It's awesome. And you look at this and you're like, well, that really wasn't that hard to do. It took some skill, and you had to have a kind of you have to have a sharp technology focused skill set to wire the things together, but it was a lot of wiring. It wasn't like it was coding based. And I look at that and like, wow, the opportunity for mid-market companies is massive, but there's not a lot of people out there actually putting that together and talking to mid-market companies saying like, okay, well, what are your problems? Oh, and this is essentially another tool in the toolbox, but there's not enough practitioners yet. There's not enough a journeyman out there to know how to apply it. And I think that's what we're seeing. We help with some of the wiring, but we still need somebody to be in the field and figure out, okay, let's plug these 5 things together, and you're going to get a great insight, or you're going to get great answers to your questions from your customers, whatever it may be. So maybe before we move to Jordan's final question, because I think we got to be aware of time here a little bit. Sure. Adam, I want to ask you one final one for me, and that's if I'm a mid-market technology leader, I'm a CIO of a $100 million company, and I said, wow, this community sounds really cool. I want to be part of this. How do they go about that? What do they need to do?
If they go to mesitnetwork.com, it's a very light, a very light fill out in terms of a registration. That'll come right into me. I'll take a look, make sure you are who you say you are. You're at a mid-market firm. You're not at a technology vendor, and I will approve you into that network. If you want to learn more about outside of that before just going to there, if you email me at adennison@thechannelcompany.com, I'm happy to have a dialogue around the network and anything we can do to help out mid-market IT leaders.
That's cool.
Thank you for dropping that in and setting up the alley-oop, Mark. That was lovely.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, Mark's pretty good at that. So we're closing down at the end of time, and I like to wrap these up because you guys have been pretty in the weeds with some very technological and leadership-oriented questions. And like I always say, Mark's probably sick of me saying this, but I like to make sure that people remember that our guests are not strictly technology leaders. They're not tech-based robots. They're actually people outside of work. And for people who might not know you that well and would like to know you just a little bit better, Adam, outside of work, what are your passions, hobbies, and interests? What makes you tick?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I'm probably gonna have to change them in the next few years. Sadly, I've got 3 kids. I've got a 17-year-old, 15-year-old, and a 12-year-old are all very active in sports. And I've been coaching all three of them. I can't coach my 17-year-old anymore. She's too old. But I coach my son in baseball competitively for a number of years. I now have him in high school, so that those days are gone. I've got one left that I can coach with, though. My youngest is in 6th grade, so I coach her basketball team. But that's spent an awful lot of my time over the last 10 years, and I just absolutely love it. It's a great community here. So after that, I gotta, I guess, figure out, take up golf or something like that to spend my times. But I certainly I love watching sports. I went to Syracuse, so I got to watch them play a horrible game last night and secure their spot, not in the NCAA tournament. But so I'll spend a lot of time watching sports and watching my kids play sports now. And for the next 2 to 3 years, I'll still be able to be a coach, and then maybe I'll stick around and do some coaching outside of them. Just give me something to do once they're off in college. But that's a big passion of mine.
That's fantastic, and I will say you are our second baseball coach on the podcast this week.
Awesome.
So thank you for being a great baseball coach.
Awesome.
With that in mind, clocking in a minute early, I just want to say, Adam, thank you so much for being a fantastic guest on this podcast, for talking so much about the importance of community and evangelizing the Midsize Enterprise Services at the Channel Company. I think you've done a absolutely fantastic job. Stick around for a sec, but for those of you still listening, stick around. We'll have a new episode coming out in about a week. Bye, everybody.
Thanks
a lot. Really appreciate it.